Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bruno's MMA show. I am very happy today to kind of mix two of my passions in this episode. I have some guests with me who worked on a graphic novel about MMA, and they let me read the first half of it because it hasn't come out yet. The name is Kill a Man. I am very excited for it. And as they say, good stories are different things to different people. Me, I'm looking for this like good MMA experience on a comic book page, but I think it'll also mean different things to other people too. I think it's gonna draw different readers for different reasons, and all in a very positive way. So I'll let my guests introduce themselves and just basically explain what they did on the comic.
Sure. Well, I can go first. I'm Steve Orlando. I write comics, animation. I'm all over the place. Right now, I'm the writer of Wonder Woman at DC and a whole host of originals, including Kill a Man. And I'm co-writing the book with Phil Kennedy Johnson, who's going to be up next. And I also work with Alec Morgan, who's doing the art on the book. My first thing at DC, Midnighter, which came out in 2015. Alec drew issue 2, and that's sort of how we met. Phil and I also met through comics, actually, at a bar outside Albany, where we ended up watching UFC together. So this book, in many ways, is a culmination of a lot of things that's been coming for a long time. An idea that I've been toying around with, probably since 2015, but when it sort of became a reality, I realized in the writing of it, the queer side of it deserves a lot of authenticity, but so does the MMA side too. And to be frank, I'm the team coward on the creative team. I have no experience with mixed martial arts other than watching it and getting my ass kicked in high school. So this is why I reached out to Phil, who's a friend, because this is an important book and it's an important topic. And yeah, the combat sports side deserved to be just as authentic as everything else in the book. And so when it came time to really build this, Phil and I got together and decided we were going to work together.
Phillip Kinley Johnson. As Steve said, I'm the co-writer and been looking forward to telling the story for a long time. Steve and I met through MMA. Well, through comics, but as he said, we hung out and discovered that we shared a love for MMA, and it's the only sport I really actively practice, and the only one that I follow. The only one I give a shit about, frankly. I'd never done a sports book, and kind of wanted to, and this is a really powerful story that I wanted to be a part of. So, other projects I've done, I'm doing Last God right now, DC Black Label. Marvel Zombies, Captain America. I've done a lot of creator-owned things at Boom Studios and other places, and some other things can't talk about yet, but very excited for Last God to come out later this year. This is a passion project for all of us, and super stoked to be a part of it and to have Alec on board as the artist.
Let me put over Phil quickly as well. Like, he's already handed me my ass just in the promotional planning of this book. We did a promotional shoot back in last March. And the photographer was like, "Why don't you guys play box a little bit, right?" And so we're doing it, and I basically just teleported onto my ass. I don't even know how it happened, just playing around. So I was there's a heavy amount of authenticity, and I mean, Alec also practices. I'll toss it over him in a minute, but unlike Phil, he's also tall enough just to pick me up like a basketball and throw me around. So our relationship is very different, but. He's the only artist that could bring this book to life. So tell him about yourself.
I'm Alec Morgan. I'm a comic book artist, illustrator from Vermont. As Steve said, we met in 2015 on Midnighter, and I think the first MMA thing we did together was we were at a con and we had this giant bar group that all watched UFC 200 and were disappointed by Brock Lesnar not getting knocked out immediately by Mark Hunt. That was a big...
Yeah.
I forgot that. Yeah, Alec was there the first... he was there for the moment I came to love UFC, which I actually did forget. Really, he was there when it was born, because I'm still a pro wrestling fan as well. I either what you'll find out is I like either something that's completely worked or completely real. I feel like every other sport in between is just an excuse for... So let's either go right to the violence... or let's have something that gives you all the fanfare all the time. So I watched UFC for the first time with Alec because being a wrestling fan, I hated. I mean, Brock Lesnar's just a piece of shit in general. So I wanted to see him get his ass kicked, and of course he didn't. But that is also the night Amanda Nunes won her first championship, and seeing her make history, I was a fucking hook from then on. So in two different ways, yeah. Like Phil and Alec have been there with me for this sport basically from the beginning on my side.
So now you have alluded to it, but just kind of to give the context, because I did present this comic as an MMA comic, but it's not just that. And our dislike for Brock Lesnar, I think, is shared by all. I don't know about the other two. I don't want to speak for them, but he did say some things that I really don't agree to, and it kind of says something about the sport. I have to say that. He's still like one of the sports, in both sports you mentioned, biggest stars, and it's kind of like people don't care. And anyway, all that to say, let's stop talking about him. But Amanda Nunes is awesome, greatest of all time female fighter, if you ask me, and also a role model, I believe, because there's never been any controversy surrounding her, nothing unpleasant. She's just done awesome things. But all that to say, so this comic, would you like to tell us what basically the synopsis is?
Well, the short version is, Kill a Man. It's funny, we put it about UFC, mixed martial arts, but it originated in my mind as a boxing book, and it sort of is essentially about. It's kind of like Creed. If in Creed, Adonis had to train with Ivan Drago instead of Rocky in that first movie. So what you have James Bellyi, who 20 years ago watched this queer fighter, Xavier Mayne, kill his dad in the ring. Problem is, his dad was a big bigot, throwing slurs at him in the ring. Xavier gets angry, loses his temper, not temperature, and ends up ending this guy's life. Now, this was based off of Emil Griffith, who was an actual bisexual boxer in the 60s and did a similar thing. And the title, Kill a Man, actually comes from a quote that he said in a book that he wrote afterwards. He lived until recently. He's sort of held up as an icon in a lot of communities. Like, oh, this guy called you a bad name and you fucking killed him. But as he talks about, it's no small thing and it's very complicated. So he had said, I kill a man and people cheer for me. I love a man and people say that's a sin. And that's where our title comes from. Yeah. So what we did is we took that and we gave it as much attention possible. So yeah, James Bellyi 20 years ago watched Xavier Mayne kill his father, who had said some bigoted things. Flash forward to now, he's like the Conor McGregor of the moment. He's up and coming. He's got his title shot. He runs his mouth. He's all about the hype. And the presser the night before his title shot, or a couple days before his title shot, his opponent catfishes him and outs him in front of the world. So suddenly, this up-and-comer who has everything behind him has nothing behind him. His entourage leaves him. His family, who now says, oh, well, you're one of those kind of people that killed my husband, your dad, you're one of them. How could you? His trainers, they all leave him. And so the only person he has to train for this championship match and to train for the climb back is the person that killed his dad in front of him 20 years ago for essentially being who he is. And so when you pick up Kill a Man, it's two people, the last two people on the planet that ever want to see each other again, but have no choice but to work together.
I wanna really get to many things, but because I read the first half that you sent me and I was blown away. And I want to mention the art in a moment, but just to kind of follow what you just said. What struck me when I read the book, and I'm going to be open here, and I was so pleasantly surprised, because when I read the synopsis, I was thinking certain things were, okay, obviously this is a story they want to tell, so to serve the story, I guess we live in a world where, because I was thinking, okay, even if the guy was outed, I imagine the internet comments, but no one could deny him a title shot over it. And I was thinking those things at first, but I was, when you want to read a story and it looks like it's going to be good, you can overlook certain things. However, I want to say, the story addressed it perfectly. The way it was done was so similar to how those things happen in the sport. It was just perfect. I was like, yeah, this is how they would do it, isn't it? It made sense, because the thing is that what I found interesting is intolerance is not always this straightforward thing. It can be this very subtle thing. And not only that is, again, I want to avoid spoilers, but there's a character.
Book, Bruno, you can spoil away. It's only the first half. So
I'm gonna just say that in that case, I'm gonna keep it short because even I disagree with you. I want to keep it as spoiler free as possible. But let's just say where I was pleasantly surprised is that the other fighter, that James Bellyi, how do you pronounce it again?
Yeah, Bellyi's fine.
Bellyi. The other fighter that outs him. What I liked is you also address the fact that some people are not necessarily personally bigoted. They'll just use any tool to get ahead in life, which is kind of like some fighters consider it like, okay, if I can get into my opponent's head, I'm just gonna do that because I want to come ahead. And you know that just sounded true. Like not everyone is one note. You know, like some people are just gonna do things that are not morally okay, but you can also see where they were coming from. And just those details in the story, I was so pleasantly surprised. And just the dialogue, you could imagine this mixed martial arts event, like the way people talk, the promoter talks, the way the announcer talks. It was just like these guys got it right, and they really got it right. And you know, the thing is that I can imagine just a fan of MMA picking this comic up and being like, this is awesome. And of course, there's people who'll be both. And then I can also imagine like someone who's queer picking up the comic and like, oh, representation, that's cool, you know? And as I always say with representation, it's kind of one of those things where you don't need to be the person represented. If it bothers you, look inside of you. Like, why would it, you know? So I think if you're an MMA fan, first of all, this is like MMA on the comic book page. It is amazing. I didn't expect to feel that MMA feel. Like just everything about it was right. And but again, I want to keep it spoiler free. But like I just appreciated how no character was one note. The story, the pacing was amazing, and within that pacing, the art. I want to get to the art. When people start reading comics, they kind of imagine that comic books are just these set of drawn photos, one after the other, sort of. And they don't necessarily appreciate how the way a page is structured makes the story flow. And just the art in this comic, you can see the movement in it. And it just flows from one page to the other. And the only place I found, I think, where it was a bit more section was kind of, I don't know if it was an homage to Dark Knight Returns, but kind of like what happened in the past, just reminded me of that scene when the Waynes get murdered. It was I don't know if it was just this thing that I imagined, but everything about how it is drawn and structured just flows. You're reading through this thing, and I completely forgot I only had the first half, and it stops in the middle of a fight. And I was completely hooked, and then I was like, oh yeah, right, I don't have the second half.
In your face. Yeah, as far as the flow, I mean, that is directly because we have Alec on the book. Like when we were talking about doing this book, when Steve and I were talking about it, he was talking up Alec, and I didn't know Alec, but they'd worked together on Midnighter, and he said that Alec knew MMA, and that was a huge get because, I mean, Alec's style also suits the book really well, but just the knowledge of MMA made it so much. It gave us this freedom to really choreograph a legit fight, you know, where the format of the book is going to be, you know, a little bit different and, you know, bigger. And we were really stoked to have that freedom to be able to, you know, I can write, you know, so-and-so throws a spinning back kick and fighter B, you know, ducks underneath it, and that sets him up for the double leg takedown. The next panel, you know, he shoots in for the double leg. The next panel, you see him start to go over, and like you can set up this and I don't have to like send like, you know, this sequence of exacting images. Like if I were to send direction like that to a fighter or to an artist that didn't know the game, it would come out really disjunct. But Alec knew what I was talking about and made the whole thing really smooth.
Yeah. I have to say, Alec, I do have some questions for you, man. But I have to say, I'm a huge fan of Batman. And by the way, I did collect Midnighter when it came out. To me, it was like, what if Batman had fun? That was my take on Midnight.
That was actually
and let go a little bit, you know, like, okay, I'm just going to off the bad guys and I'm going to have fun in my personal life. Anyway, But I gotta say, as a huge fan of Batman, and sort of superheroes is not that big of a deal, but Batman's such a big deal on the fact that he's a martial artist, and I'm not gonna name any names. I wouldn't do that. But as a huge Batman fan, sometimes I look at the fight and I'm like, I really wish that DC's greatest martial artist, unless you say it's Lady Shiva, or anyway, like you could argue about it, but I really wish that
it is Lady Shiva. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna bust into your podcast. He's number 2, my friend, but he's better at everything else than her.
Yeah, recently in Detective Comics, Shiva revealed that she was actually better than Sheila Dunn, and anyway. Okay. Maybe the wrong show for this. I don't want to get into DC Comics like way too much for an MMA show. So all that to say that sometimes I look at Batman fighting and I'm like, this doesn't look like the greatest martial artist on earth. Like they're cool pictures. The artists are awesome, but it's kind of like this still picture that doesn't make sense with the next one. And then Batman's like throwing a punch and he's basically like leaning forward all the way. And I'm like, okay, I have to turn that part of my brain off. And I did not have to do that with this comic. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just physical actions make more sense to an artist that's familiar with those actions in their life. So like if you had a rock climbing book, it would probably just suit the book to have an artist who was familiar with those movements, and then those movements will look authentic to that community of people looking at that art. And that was a big thing for me with Kill a Man, was just wanting to make the sequences feel like they feel when you watch them as an audience member. If you're watching fights, I mean, fights are really, really interesting. There's a lot of things going on. There's physical technique, but there's also just like second decision making, and then there's the flow of two people being totally in the moment and how they interact off of each other. And it's a fascinating thing to watch, especially if you're familiar with those fighters and their styles and all these things. So I wanted that feeling to be in the art. And there's lots of sequences in the book that are directly inspired by like particular sequences that happened in real fights. And so like if you're an MMA fan, you could look at different parts of the fight scenes in the book, and if you're familiar with those fights, you could find those sequences and know where they came from. So like all of this stuff was just important to me, trying to get that on the page and push the just the physical aspect of it as far as I could. Luckily, the collaboration allowed for that. And I got to push that farther than most artists in other contexts would even be able to, just because of constraints that they're working with. So even if you're doing a Batman book, you can't spend like 2 months doing choreography. Yeah, so like we just had a lot of conditions on this book that allowed the creative team to really stretch and push that aren't normal for how comics are normally created. And that, I think, adds a lot to the where we got to with the story.
Because I called it a graphic novel, and then we kind of switched terms, graphic novel, comic book, and for people watching, we're like, what are they talking about? Basically, graphic novel is a comic book, but the way it's worked on and sold is normally comic books are serialized, very often monthly, bi-monthly, and then they're collected in trade paperbacks altogether. But a graphic novel will, at least that's my definition, will be prepared as its own volume. It's not going to be like 22 pages every month and then collected. It's just prepared as this single book, therefore graphic novel. And you mentioned like kind of like what you were allowed to, sort of the time you had and all of that. I want to get very soon into Aftershock, the company that published the comic, because I do have questions about what you chose and all that. But first of all, I don't want to skip over this. Phillip, Steve said earlier that you were kind of like the go-to guy to, what are you doing? This isn't like this, or something like that. So first of all, you practice MMA, I heard. So how long have you been practicing?
God, I'm not sure, maybe 10-ish years. But I mean, it's been, I mean, on and off that whole time. Like I stay very busy, and I'm active duty Army as well. And as the writing career has gotten busier, and I've had a kid and all that, I have not. I also tour a lot for my job. I'm on the road a lot, and so I'm not able to train consistently like for the last 10 years. It's been very spotty. But I think I started probably about 10 years ago. Um, I had dabbled in my first martial arts experience ever. I'd always been interested in it, and I remember watching the videos when I was a kid, but then never done it until basic training actually. And then we did what's called Army Combatives, which is just an Army martial arts system that's very loosely based on MMA. Like there are jujitsu like elements to it. Um, and I just really fell in love with it. So when I got my first duty station, I started looking for martial arts in the area. Um, Ended up finding like Kempo and Hapkido and things like that, and they were fine, and it was cool and everything, but wasn't really scratching the itch that I had. I was like, this seems impractical. Like the katas that you do, and there's just a lot of impractical things. Like you learn like in Kempo, and I'm not throwing any shade. Kempo's great, but
Just say it. Just say it.
you do you throw like a whatever hammer fist or like a palm strike or whatever, and then when you actually get into sparring at the end of the hour you spar and everyone's just fucking doing whatever. I'm like, oh, what are we doing this shit for? Like, this is like nobody's using any of that. And it just seemed weird. So when I had a neighbor, had me over for a fight night, had me over for like a pay-per-view UFC thing. I think Mirko Cro Cop was fighting on that card, and who else? There might have been a BJ Penn fight. I don't think he was, but he wasn't the champ then. He was fighting what's his name? The Sean Shirk, I think.
Sean Shirk.
That might have been the Sean Shirk fight. There was, I don't know, I watched a few fights at my neighbor's house kind of in a row, but whatever that first one was, I'm pretty sure Crow Cop was in that first one, and I was just like, my eyes went wide. I was like, this is what I've been looking for. Like, immediately fell in love with it.
Did he land the left kick in that one?
Jesus. There was actually, when Alec was talking about taking stuff from specific fights, yeah. I mean, I don't think I didn't necessarily see a Crow Cop moment, but I remember like there was a moment in the book that made me think of it, because I remember I'd never seen anyone throw kicks like that. Like I'd never seen these kicks that just, I mean, his legs are just like fucking tree trunks, yeah. And when you see guys cover up, like he's throwing a head kick and the guy covers up, and when Crow Cop would hit him, I swear you see the floor shake. Like it was just like this doom, this huge powerful thing. I'm like, fuck, man, that guy kicks hard, and it really made an impact on me. And there are moments in the book where like you know it looks so dynamic, and I remember just kind of capturing that feeling of seeing Crow Cop kick. I'm like, wow, that was amazing. So anyway, yeah, so I saw those videos or the live fights, and just so impressed with how practical everything was. And then I went and took a class, and instead of like being this very slow, gradual build up to being a black belt, yeah. It's like, here's a double leg takedown. This is how you do it. In this class, we're going to learn the double leg takedown. And it's this super practical thing that you can use like right then, once you get it. The whole thing to seem much more practical. You just cut out all the bullshit, and you also lose some of the aesthetic beauty of some martial arts, but it's just so practical and effective and just great, So I was really in love with it from then on.
Well, I would say it kind of depends, You have like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and it's so beautiful, like Israel Adesanya. Like I think it depends. Like these days, like even people are kind of redeeming certain martial arts, because not everything that was in traditional martial arts was wrong. It's just that if people don't actually try it on resistant opponents, we're gonna try to punch them in the face, we're gonna just grab them, and there's no ref to separate, all those details. And even stuff like boxing, for example, up until recently, I was one of boxing is super practical, right? But I did not believe in like dipping under because I was thinking knees, kicks to the head. I was thinking those terms. And recently we just saw like Gaethje dismantle Ferguson that way. So I'm kind of like, oh crap, yeah, okay. There's always something to be learned where we're very quick to dismiss things, and then someone brings it back, and like it's just taekwondo, like oh, taekwondo doesn't work. And in itself, of course, if you just do taekwondo and then someone takes you down, you're in trouble. But doesn't mean that all those kicks are worthless. So what if you condition your shins? So anyway,
well, I mean, Gaethje in that fight, what was so fascinating about it was Gaethje's ability to mix like boxing head movement with the clinch work, with the leg kicks, and then just control the distance.
Yeah.
But he was still using all those boxing techniques. It was just that was an awesome fight.
And I remember like telling a new guy recently before the pandemic and the gym was open. I remember telling him like, don't dip, it's dangerous. And he dipped very low, he got kicked on the head. That's why and the thing is that it's not really don't dip, it's don't dip too low. For him. Yeah. So it's kind of like all those things where anyway. Yeah. So when you say that, if anyone out there does Kempo and like if any traditional martial arts where they go like, you're disrespecting us, you know what? Look, just go to an MMA gym, learn how to stuff a takedown, and then prove that it works. Just do it when someone's trying to punch you in the face, and that you don't need to get offended. Just prove us wrong, because people are wrong sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Machida too, right? Like years ago, Machida was suddenly like, here's my karate and I'm fucking awesome. And I mean, and GSP had a karate background too. But these guys also had skill elsewhere, and they managed to put it together into this amazing style.
I don't have much to add because you guys are clearly like the ones that know much more about this. But I will say it's
nerding out. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting to me from the outside to watch. If you watch the early type of MMA fights that the main Bellyi Senior fight is based off of, like, when I go back and look at stuff, then it's all people I knew from wrestling, by the way. So like when I go back and look at Dan Severn fights, it's very clear that like mixed martial arts was one thing, and then guys that had wrestling would come in, like real wrestling would come in, and basically just clown them. Like you would see him doing things that you could never get away with today because the level of skill has raised so much. But to see him just picking up people and essentially and suplexing them in a way that you can never get away with now, it's clear. I mean, it's interesting to me because the deficiencies in certain things I feel like were really evident back then because they really managed to balance things out. Now I watch with my boyfriend and he's like, well, when are they going to pick them up and shit? I'm like, well, that doesn't really happen. Everybody, the skill level's up much more. But when you had like, especially much less rules and things and people could just do whatever, when the guys that were more well-rounded came in, it was so much more apparent, in the 90s versus now. Now if someone gets a takedown, it's like shocking half the time. But back then it was like watching fucking Mortal Kombat. It was
yeah, but when Rosa Namajunas was thrown on her, not on her head, but on her back, that was surprising to everyone because we haven't seen something like that in so long. Like, was that a spike on the anyway? But So Phil, just real quick. So do you, unless you want to keep that close to your chest, but were there any moments where you're just like, Steve, it doesn't work like that, or were you like all just like in sync? It was all perfect, or were there moments where you had to be like, MMA doesn't work like this, or?
No, it was never. There was not really any butting of heads. It was more like Steve has a very personal stake in this story, and my stake in the story is a very different one. Like, so it's not. We aside from figuring out what we're going to do with the ending, which we came to like really collaboratively. Most of it, Steve and I both just kind of knew which scenes to take. Like I.
Basically, well, go ahead. I was going to say, the way we work means that wouldn't happen so much, Bruno, because Phil and I basically split who does the lead work and the finishing work between things that we have more personal experience in. But he can say a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Yeah. Steve had a very clear idea what he wanted to, like the story he wanted to tell with the characters and their relationships. And there's the relationship between James Bellyi and his trainer is one that I wanted to show. Like I wanted to show how, like, what does Xavier Mayne bring to the table as a trainer, as a fighter? Like why? I mean, obviously, James feels like he needs to train with him because he's the only guy that will. Because when he gets outed, everyone abandons him. He loses his fight camp. Like the fight camp feels like they need to protect themselves from a political standpoint. So does the UFC, and the fans are all being douchebags, and not all, but like the whole scene changes overnight.
Yeah, the EFC. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yes, of course, that's what I mean. Is EFC. So let's see. So the fight stuff, I mostly took the lead writing the fight scenes and the training stuff. So there was never a moment where Steve's like, well, I want to fight like this. And I'm like, no. Like we both kind of, like you said, we both kind of took lead in at different moments in the story. And then not that there's ever a moment where suddenly I completely wrote these pages and Steve completely wrote these, but I did the framework of the fights and wrote the dialogue in those. And then Steve would go over and kind of, homogenize it with his own style. And I do the same thing with the relationship things later. Like, well, and then we would kind of work out those beats. Like, well, the conversation just starts from a different place.
What it usually comes down to is I use the word fuck too much, and Phil has to dial it back. And then Phil, I think the main things for Phil were I was saying fuck too much, and I would sometimes say that there was like 10% too much like detailed fight stuff. Because it was like there was a couple like when he's explaining to Carlo like why he needs Mayne, or when he's explaining to Mayne like it was originally like slightly more detailed. But yeah, there's never really any big conflicts, and it's easy for me to say fuck less in writing. In real life, not as much.
As you can tell, I love the word fuck.
Sorry.
I think I've shown that here.
Well, Phil's a gentleman, and in the military, I am neither of those things, so I can say it as much as I want.
If there's anything we've all seen lately, is that only gentlemen are in the military.
I said and.
Steve, so basically, because I was going from what you told me earlier, that's why I had that impression. But I want to also address, because this is basically a gay main character in a fighting book. Also, apparently at first it was going to be a boxing graphic novel. I'm really happy it's MMA, because boxing already has plenty of awesome fictional material, and MMA is sorely lacking in quality material. So I'm just like so happy this is an MMA book. But I don't know. I don't even know how to ask this question. But basically, why was this story important for you? What do you hope it does for certain readers?
Well, look, it was important to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Rocky narrative, and it was never going to be like, we decided very early on if we were going to modernize the book, it had to be MMA. But the inspiration for me did come from the Rocky franchise, because of especially the movies, the good ones in that franchise, sort of have. Sure, Jan. But in the original one in the 70s, Rocky does represent, even though he's still white and straight, he does represent a relatively misjudged part of the community at the time. He's blue collar. He doesn't go to college. Nobody thinks he can amount to anything. And all these perceptions that society has are put upon him. And the movie, even though it's about boxing, is really about him proving himself to himself. That's why he doesn't win at the end. It's about, in the end, like he ends up saying in Creed, your toughest opponent is the one in the mirror. It's not everyone else. And so when I came to Creed, it was like, oh, now communities of color, the black community gets a hero that says the same thing. No matter what these external things are going on, you're really the heart. You can go the distance, and you can keep in the fight. And also, I liked in that how Rocky, for the people that came to love him in the 70s, he was still going the distance, but as his audience aged, the fight changed. So to me, most important in that movie was not just Adonis going the distance, being a black man, dealing with his issues But it was also that Rocky is still that character who's not giving up, even if he has a crisis of faith. But just like his audience, now it's not about, beating someone up or the expectations of society. It's about the same things that his audience is going through. He's lost his wife. He's outlived his best friend. He has cancer. And these are all things that people Stallone's age and Rocky's age are potentially dealing with. And he's still there to say, no, you can keep fighting. You can go the distance. You can keep going, because I am. So having a character that does that was important to me for the queer community, because we haven't really had it. So that's where I was coming from with that. We want to update it, modernize it. That's why we're doing mixed martial arts. And make it more tense, obviously. That's why we're pulling in the Emil Griffith through the Xavier Mayne character. Mm-hmm. But it's, I wanted to give that to the community because it's something I would have wanted as a younger reader, and I can do that and tell a great story, tell one that hasn't been told before. And that's sort of where the idea came from. And also, it's important to me to have characters and stories that push representation, but aren't just about, there's more to James Bellyi than the fact that he's gay.
Yes.
And he's also not perfect. There's a place in the world for utopian fiction where there's no struggle and everything works out, because sometimes at a certain age, especially, people need that. But sometimes they need reality too. And sometimes, not everyone has a straight line, smooth, sailing path of acceptance towards their own sexuality. A lot of the things that James does are things that I thought I'll be honest, are things that I thought in high school, are things that I thought earlier in my life. I mean, I'm 34, so, like 15 years ago, where I was like, I think not everyone, but I certainly had a wrong-headed phase where I was like, oh, well, I'm queer, but I'm not one of those. I still like man things. And and that's all horse shit. That's toxic horse shit. But it's a path to learning that you're wrong. And that's a path that James is on, to being like, oh, there is nothing wrong with how he is. And it obviously intensified in him because of his family history and losing his father. But that's an important message to show that, and it was similar with Midnighter too. There's not one way that is right or wrong to be a gay person. And there's not one way that is right or wrong to, quote unquote, be tough or strong. Yeah. My perceptions of that have completely changed, and I wanted to sort of show people that through what James goes through, because you can be gay and be a quote unquote badass. You can be gay and be a champion. Mm-hmm. You can also be gay and be none of those things, and one is not more valid than the other. It's like, and ultimately, personally, I've come around to the other side. I'm relatively masculine. I'm relatively a lot of things. But that's doesn't make me better or worse. And also, to be honest, when you look at someone like Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye, who wears gender-challenging clothing, and doesn't identify as male, has a more traditionally feminine voice and behavior, ultimately, I've come around to thinking that they are, to be honest, much braver than me, because the element of danger to live that truth and exit their house every day and face society that is going to judge them more obviously, it's a lot stronger than going out of my house looking like me. I'm wearing a fucking V-neck. I swear a lot, and I wear trucker hats. Like I'm from Central New York. But yeah, I've done a complete 180. It is so brave when that's your authentic self, just to even go to the fucking grocery store in the modern context. That I really wanted to say this thing. That there is, this is a path that some of us are on. We have to work through what it means, but. Hopefully by the end of the book, James gets to the point where he realizes that he can both be himself, and be a champion and reach his goals. A lot of the times we think it's either or. If I come out, what am I going to sacrifice? Well, I can't do this. I can't be gay and do this. I can't be bisexual and do this. Well, you really can. And so, that's important to me. It's important to me because people need to know. People who, from the outside, that have wrong preconceived notions about queer people need to know, and people from within the community who are struggling with their own identity need to know that, no, you need to be yourself. You need to overcome those hurdles. And if people disagree, then fuck them. But that's why I like the combat sports metaphor. Yeah. It's very easy to wrap up all of James's problems in his opponent and just have him punch them in the face.
Yeah. Nevertheless, again, I have to say that the opponents are not all one note, and I really appreciated that. And I'm gonna say something that shouldn't have to be said, but in a way, I want to say it to help the book as well. Like I don't think it should have to be said, but I'll say it to help. As a straight man reading the comic, I wasn't reading something that was like, oh, I'm reading gay erotica. This isn't for me. Like I was reading.
But I failed.
No. No, but I was reading a story, and in the same way that characters don't need to be the reader, like you read about the fictional characters because you want to see the world through many points of view. If you only read stories that are your own point of view, like you are a very limited person and you should open up your mind. So I just want to say, even though it shouldn't have to be said, but I think it can help to say these things as more and more material will come out. And, like the same way that to watch Creed, you don't need to be, you don't need to be dark skinned to watch Creed. It's the same thing, and that's very important that, I think there's this perception in a lot of straight men. And as one, I want to say this, it's not because the main character is gay that this is just for gay people, or for queer people. Like I was reading a story that hooked me. The characters were interesting. I was really invested in what happened and what was, and man, and there's a scene that's in the first half that I'm just gonna keep it vague, but when Mayne and Bellyi meet for a second time, I guess I should say, or third, I don't know. Anyway, when they meet as adults, that scene hooked me. I was so hooked, and it was so powerful, and it was just awesome storytelling. And again, the fact that it didn't go for the easy ways to make you feel about the characters, because it's so easy to grab a character and just have everyone be super mean without reason. And yeah, maybe you'll feel bad for a character, but it doesn't make for an investing story. And everyone acting around the main character had motivations that, even though some of them were immoral and not okay at all, you can understand that mentality. You've talked to people in your life with that mentality, So it was just really good storytelling. And I just hope they make it into a movie. How about that? You keep talking about Rocky and Creed. How about they make it into a movie? Like, is the studio going to have the balls to do that? I hope so.
We hope someone
does. It's just really good.
Well, Bruno, from the outside, like, it's interesting to me. I mean, you guys all know MMA more than me. But the reason it appeals to me is because a lot honestly, like comics, it's a thing that people do that gets discounted from the outside for different reasons. Like if you're a comics person, you want to have a comics career, most people don't think that that's a job. And if you do MMA, there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, that's barbaric, that's X, Y, and Z. They don't really understand the drive to compete. And I think that's an important thing that Phil has brought to the book, and Alec has helped even bolster in the book with his art. And it's important to me too, like the scene in Creed that's about boxing, but that I hope I translate. I tried to pick up and translate it to a scene with Bellyi and his mom. When Adonis goes home and says that he's, he knows that she, Marianne doesn't understand, but he's just got to go and do this thing. And he'll call her. And she just says, well, if you got to get in someone's ring, you don't have to call me. Yeah. It's so cold, even though that's his mom. And it just, to me, is so moving as well, because it shows that you either get it or you don't. And if you are someone who's interested in competing in mixed martial arts, yeah, people understand that drive or they do not. And I think that that's the thing that's very primal. With modesty, I think I understand it because I've lived my life. I spent 20 years trying to break into comics, and everybody, including my own family, told me to quit numerous times. So I, adjacent to it, understand it. But that's this sort of primal, unknowable thing that I think is fascinating, and hopefully it's in the book. But that is because of this collaboration. Like everything you're talking about, like it's when it comes to the combat sports aspect of this, it's because these two other guys have lived it and done it, and that's why this team is really an asset. The three of us.
Okay, I think some of you have to go real soon. So I mentioned it earlier, but I want to know you're publishing with Aftershock is the publisher. Any of you, do you want to mention why they were like the good publisher for this? Was it just like they were the ones who stepped forward to take on the project, or was there what's the story basically? Why Aftershock?
Well, I'll say, every company has its pluses and minuses for sure. That's just the reality whenever you're choosing a publisher. But what I love about them is that they're fearless with content. There's a lot of There's a lot of places that will say they want your story, but then when you get into the nuts and bolts, they're nickel and diming you out of the story that you want to tell. And the one thing I mean, there's a lot of things that are great about them, but the reason that I enjoy working with them especially is that once they commit to publishing a story and telling a story, they're incredibly hands off. In their mind, once they've said yes, that's the consideration period, and then they get the fuck out of the way. And we've had, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil and Alec, but we've had really, like, from a content standpoint, no pushback. We've been able to do everything we want to do, whether it's in the violence. I mean, I'm showing things on the gay side that have never been talked about in a book before, to be frank, like that are going to be validating for a lot of people. And they're fearless with it, and that's at least for me why the book had to happen with them.
And they give you the space to pursue, those goals and whatever aspects of the collaboration that you find compelling and go in that direction. And also, just like I mentioned earlier, like in comics, there tend to be like a lot of time constraints that you're dealing with all the time. And in all of my published work in the past, that was a major thing that we had to contend with. And I always felt like there was a huge compromise involved in that setup. And Aftershock is the only company that only publisher I've worked with that just gives you the room and the time to do what you need to do to make the product what you want it to be. Because the difference between a hack job and something that's actually really good is just time. And that's a great thing.
Yeah, I was going to say similar things to both of those guys. They're like, their slogan right now is "Read dangerously," and they back that up in their content, and it's been awesome. I mean, I think it's show. I mean, not just the content of this book either. They're also doing this, like, the crazy format, which is unusual, and yeah, the fact that no one else is doing an MMA book. This is like Steve said. There's like the LGBTQ aspects are, really, I don't know. I feel like we're pushing a lot of boundaries of this book, and they never blinked. So they've been awesome.
Yeah. One thing I will say, and when you talk about boundaries and how it's depicted, and I have to admit, I don't know. I'm just gonna say it. Like, I imagine that maybe another company would have been like, okay, if you have to do this, can you put the main character on the other side of this scene then, if he's gonna be the main character? I don't, like, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but those scenes, can you put him on the other side? Like, maybe they'll be better for the main fighter character, And I was like, these guys are doing what they want.
Let's just get this out of the way. You're talking about him fucking bottoming. I know what you're talking about. But that's the point, by the way, is to subvert that notion that, your role, your sexual role somehow, like, denotes your strength or I mean, that's all horseshit. And that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Like.
No, I was joking around, but yes, no, I was gonna bring it up if I had to, but yes, no, I thought I was looking at that, I was like, wow, they really went for it. They didn't shy away. It wasn't like in Batman Damned where they show like the shadow of Batman's penis, and then they censor it afterwards, and like they're all shocked and.
Well, Batman's dick is slightly more famous, actually, even than the three of us combined, so it is a little different. But I hear you. Yeah.
That's the quote right there. I think we can be that quote, guys.
Put that on the back of the book. Fuck it.
Yeah. Okay. Any parting words, guys?
It's been thanks for giving us a platform to talk about this project. It's been a great thing to work on, and it's fun to talk about.
Yeah, totally. I'm really stoked to get this book out there in people's hands. It's been, a real thrill to work on something that's so unusual, and that really isn't just a cool book or a good story. It, like, matters, and it's been a real joy to work on.
Exactly what they said. And also, like, Bruno, you're the first person with a heavy mixed martial arts background and interest that has read the book. And the fact that it's working for you and connecting with you, I will say, is really exciting to me. I can't speak for the other guys. You know, they're soulless husks. But it's very exciting. You're gonna break, Phil. I can see you on the video. You're like a sphinx. I can't get it out of you.
You say too much.
But no, it's great to hear because we wanted to connect with everyone. We wanted to be authentic to everyone. So like this is the first MMA based podcast you've been on. Talk about it. Hope there's more, but super excited to be here to be featured talking about this book. So thank you.
Guys, it's been a pleasure. And just so you know, you know by now that I'm a huge comic book geek. So obviously, all of my self-control to stick to the subject at hand, really not going to DC Comics. So that's for sure. Okay.
I'll try to work in some MMA to my other books so we can do this again.
Okay, you know what? If you do, I don't know how it ends, but if you do a sequel or when it comes out, maybe you can go a bit more spoiler-filled. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it works for everyone. But it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you, guys. And everyone, thanks for watching.
Hey, man,
Thanks, guys.